So for this unit, remember we've been looking at Woodrow Wilson, main part of that being World War One. But I do want to kind of step back to the very beginning of this unit. Remember, we started off with the presidential election of 1912. Remember, this is in your assignment number one. In 1912, we have three major candidates. Remember Teddy Roosevelt, he has already served 2 terms as president, but he comes back in 1912. He forms a new party called the Bull Moose Party or the Progressive Party. Remember, it was kind of controversial that he's running for a third term. Remember, he's running against his friend, his former party, his hand-picked successor, William Howard Taft. So remember, Taft is a Republican. And then we have Woodrow Wilson from the Democratic Party. Now, remember what's so big about this election? All three men running, they are all three progressive. Okay, so they're all three wanting to move us forward, fix a lot of the problems from the Gilded Age. They really want to use the government to protect the people and use the government to regulate businesses. So remember in this election, the results, Teddy Roosevelt, he is going to split the Republican vote. And because of this, Woodrow Wilson and the Democratic Party will have success, and Wilson becomes the next president. So, speaking of Wilson being progressive, you need to understand what he did that was progressive. So, remember, first thing, he is going to lower the tariff rate, the Underwood tariff. Remember, this is good for the American people. They don't have to pay the high tariff. This is also great for other countries, but remember, American businesses, they did not like this new low tariff because they don't have an incentive now. Okay, they don't have this head start in front of everyone. They're going to have to lower their prices so that they can compete with these foreign businesses. Okay, so the first thing he did, he lowered the tariff rate. Second thing, a big problem that we've been talking about this whole year, the formation of monopolies, when someone has exclusive control over a product and they can do whatever they want to with the price of that product. So Wilson is going to pass a new antitrust law. It's called the Clayton Antitrust Act. It was very specific. It said you cannot have a monopoly. You cannot do these things, these business practices, because if you do, you will end up with a monopoly. So we're trying to make sure that there's competition. This is going to help out smaller businesses. This is going to help the American people out. But remember, we must have a way to enforce the Clayton Antitrust Act. So Wilson did establish the Federal Trade Commission. Also, the progressives, they do not like child labor, how those small children were having to drop out of school, go into the factories and work. So they're going to pass various child labor policies like the Keating-Owen Act, several other state laws. Also, another big problem we learned about this unit, we talked about how banks, they had no oversight. No one was regulating them. No one was watching over them. They were doing a lot of unfair business practices. So Wilson is going to establish the Federal Reserve System. Remember, it's like a three-tiered banking system. So at the top, we have the Federal Reserve Board. Those people are appointed by the president. Their whole job is to oversee money, the flow of money, inflation rates, consumer credit rights. Then in the middle, kind of the middle tier, we have the Federal Reserve Banks, the banks for banks. And then at the bottom of that triangle, we have all of the private banks that you and I go to. Okay, we needed some type of way for the government to oversee banking. So let's pause here and let's do practice question number one to see if you really understand how Wilson was progressive. Okay, so moving on to Woodrow Wilson's foreign policy, which will be here pretty much for the rest of this unit. Remember, he's not like Teddy Roosevelt, who had the big stick policy or gunboat diplomacy. He's not like Taft, who said dollar diplomacy. We can influence people, especially Latin America, with money. He is going to have moral diplomacy. He's all about spreading democracy, advancing moral progress around the globe. Remember, during his presidency, we are going to have kind of a tense relationship with Mexico. Remember, Mexico was going through a civil war. We did not like the new established government in Mexico. And remember where Mexico is, it's very close to us. So we're going to remove an embargo, a ban on trade. We remove that ban so we can start giving weapons to the revolutionaries in Mexico. During this, we are going to send troops ashore into Mexico, into their country to stop an armed shipment. Okay, so we're doing this, sending troops in without Mexican approval. As a result, we're going to start to see a lot of hatred towards the United States and Mexico. Remember, the leader of this is Pancho Villa. Remember, one night, Pancho Villa and the bandits are going to cross over the border into Columbus, New Mexico, and they're going to kill 17 Americans. Y'all, on U.S. soil, another country invaded and killed Americans. So, as a result of this, we go on a great manhunt. Remember, leading this manhunt is General John Pershing, or they like to nickname him Blackjack Pershing. So for a year, we're looking for Pancho Villa. We can't find him. After a year of looking unsuccessfully, we are going to give up. Remember why? When we enter World War I, we can't have one of our best generals and 11,000 American soldiers looking for this one guy in Mexico. They have to go and fight World War I. So our relationship with Mexico is very tense at this time. Make sure you know where Mexico is on a map. You're going to have some map questions on this test. So remember, we stopped looking for Pancho Villa because in 1917, we are going to enter World War I. So let's step back for a moment and talk about how World War I started. Remember in world history, they taught you an acronym, MAIN. So it stands for militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. So these things have been happening in Europe for years, kind of leading up, building up to this war starting. And remember the short-term cause, the spark that set it off and made them all start fighting was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Remember, he was the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. He was killed by a Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip. So that happens in 1914. Y'all, we must understand when he is assassinated and World War I starts in 1914, what is the US response? Remember, we said we hate it for you that he got assassinated and y'all are all going to war over this, but we didn't feel like we should get involved. Remember, quickly, Wilson is going to declare American neutrality. So we are not picking a side. Wilson said we are going to be impartial in thought as well as action. Remember, this is hard for Americans, especially immigrants living in the United States. But even though Wilson is saying that we're neutral, remember his actions do not really hold true to neutrality. Remember, we were giving a lot of loans, y'all, $2 billion in loans to the Allies. Okay, remember, we're doing this because they needed war supplies, and this was really benefiting our economy. Okay, our businesses are exporting a whole lot of goods, making a lot of money. We wanted to keep that trade open, so we give the loans. Okay, we also do the National Defense Act. Wilson said we had to prepare in case we do enter this war and we need to defend our country. So we start to build up the military, recruit more soldiers. We start to build more warships. So even though in 1916, when Woodrow Wilson is running for re-election, his campaign slogan is "He kept us out of war." Okay, he's priding himself on the fact that we're not getting involved. But remember, Are we really truly being neutral if we're giving loans to one side and we're building up our military and building warships? Hey, that's really not truly being neutral. So, y'all did a wonderful job in this unit creating a class timeline, looking at the steps that led the United States to declare war. So, remember those big things like Germany using unrestricted submarine warfare, those U boats attacking passenger ships, merchant ships. And remember the big one in 1915, they are going to sink the Lusitania. It is a British passenger ship, 1,200 people on board will die. Remember, out of that group, 128 Americans are going to die. Y'all, now they're messing with us. Okay. If you're killing American citizens, we're going to be mad. Okay. We have to step in. We can't let Germany continue to do this. Make sure you know where Germany is on a map. Also, remember in 1917, we have the Bolshevik Revolution going on in Russia. So they are fighting a revolution where they're becoming the world's first communist country. Remember, Vladimir Lenin was the leader of this. Okay, once Russia was going through the Bolshevik Revolution, they will pull out of World War One. Remember, they are an allied power. We feel like Great Britain, France, the Allies might lose World War One without Russia. We can't let Germany win this war. That's another reason why we had to step in and declare war. Okay, a final step, the Zimmerman telegram. So we heard several people present about this in the timeline presentations, but Germany sent this telegram to Mexico. Remember, they wanted Mexico to attack the United States, okay, kind of to keep us distracted from what Germany was doing in World War One. So they're playing off of that strained relationship that we have with Mexico. They're promising in this telegram that Mexico could get back Texas and Arizona and New Mexico. Y'all, they are promising Mexico US states. Great Britain is going to intercept this telegram. They're going to decode it. They're going to give it to the United States, and we are furious. So, because of this, we will enter World War I, April the 6th, 1917. Woodrow Wilson's justification for why we had to get involved, he said we have to make the world safe for democracy. Okay, again, that's a good example of that moral diplomacy. Let's pause here and let's do practice question number 2. Okay, so let's now get into the World War I home front. What do we have to do here at home so that we can win this war? Okay, remember we need soldiers to fight in this war. They're going to pass a law called the Selective Service Act. Okay, y'all, we know this as the draft. They are randomly selecting men for service, okay, to be in the military. 2.8 million men were drafted to fight in World War I. We also see that war is expensive. 2 ways that the government's going to finance this war. Number 1, everybody's going to pay more in taxes. And number 2, they're going to sell bonds. Remember, they called these bonds Liberty bonds or victory bonds. So you felt like you were doing your patriotic duty. You're basically loaning the government money so that they can fight this war. Okay, remember, as a result of this, the government is now indebted to the American people. Another thing that you could do at home to support the war effort, conserve resources. So we have to make sure here at home we are saving especially food so that we can send more to our soldiers who are fighting. The Food Administration Board is going to be established. It's going to be led by Herbert Hoover. He's going to go on and become president in our next unit. He had a motto that he loved to say. He said, "Food will win the war." If our soldiers are well fed, they're going to be able to fight this war and win this war. They're going to encourage Americans to grow victory gardens. Hey, in your backyard, grow your own food. That way you don't have to buy it from the store. We can send all of that to our soldiers who are fighting. They're also going to ask people to voluntarily participate in wheatless days, meatless Tuesdays, porkless Saturdays. Again, this is not mandatory in World War One, but you did feel like you were doing your duty to help your brother or your dad or your neighbor who was over there in Europe fighting in World War One. Let's pause here and do practice question number 3. Y'all, on this test, you're going to have a lot of propaganda, a lot of posters that you're going to have to read. Let's practice doing that for this question. Okay, so other things happening on the home front. Remember, when all of those men are drafted or they volunteer to go and fight in World War One, we end up with a labor shortage. So not enough people are left behind in the factories to produce all of the guns and the tanks and the bullets and the uniforms that we're going to need in the war. So we're going to see women step up. They are going to go to the factories. They are going to do these jobs. Remember, as a result of this in 1920, women are going to be rewarded by the passage of the 19th Amendment. They're going to be granted suffrage, the right to vote. We also see minorities stepping up. African Americans, Mexican Americans are going to take jobs in the factories during World War One. So most of these defense industries during World War One are going to be located in the north. As a result of this, we're going to have the Great Migration. Y'all, over 400,000 African Americans are going to take this opportunity to leave the South and move to the North. Okay, we have to remember push factors. What's pushing them out of the South? Why are they leaving the South? Jim Crow laws, racism, segregation, lynchings. Okay, remember our pull factors. What's pulling them to the North? Job opportunities, okay, economic opportunities, cultural opportunities. Okay, remember, once they got to the North, we are going to see a lot of race riots. Y'all remember watching the video about Red Summer, how the race riots started in Chicago on the beach. Okay, so other things that we learned about, so big ones here, the Espionage and Sedition Acts. Remember, espionage said you cannot be spying for the enemy. If you are, you can be fined $10,000 and you can spend up to 20 years in prison. And then the Sedition Act, remember, it just extended that and it said, if you are doing anything or saying anything to hurt the war effort, you can also be fined and you can also be put in prison. Now, remember, this was very controversial because they're in essence saying that your First Amendment right, okay, your freedom of speech can be limited. Remember the court case we have to know about this, Schenck versus the United States. Remember the guy was passing out leaflets to people who had just been drafted. And he's saying, look, they can't make you serve in the military. They can't make you go and fight. He said that he had the freedom of speech to do that, but they put him in jail. So the Supreme Court now has to decide, do you really have freedom of speech to say whatever you want? Remember, in this case, the Supreme Court said that if you were in a crowded movie theater and you yelled fire for no reason, you do not have the freedom of speech to do that. They said you are putting people in a clear and present danger. Remember, we talked about a recent example. If you are in an airport, you can't just yell, I have a bomb, because you have freedom of speech. Okay, if you're putting people in a clear and present danger, the government is saying in this case that they can limit your freedom of speech. So remember, this sets a dangerous precedent. Okay, the government's telling us that your rights, your liberties can be limited in order to protect national security. Okay, we see that here, Schenck versus the United States. Let's pause here and do practice question number 4 about that case. Okay, so to wrap up the war, remember the United States is going to be very successful in helping the Allies win the war. We joined in 1917, y'all. The fighting is over in 1918. By 1919, we are going to meet up in Paris with all of the world leaders at the Palace of Versailles, and we are in essence writing the Treaty of Versailles. Remember, Woodrow Wilson is going to go there as the representative for the United States, and he has his plan with him. Remember, his 14 points. He said, look, if we do these 14 things, okay, the 14 points, I believe that we can end all wars. Remember, his 14th point was the first ever international peacekeeping organization. It was called the League of Nations. He said we have to have a way where we can all sit down, talk about our problems instead of just saying, look, you made me mad, let's fight, let's go to war over this. So Wilson thinks this is a wonderful idea. But according to the US Constitution, y'all, the Senate has the authority to ratify treaties. So Woodrow Wilson brings the Treaty of Versailles back to the United States. He presents it to the US Senate, and y'all, they look at it and they say, no. They refused to sign it because of the League of Nations. Y'all remember Article 10 in the League of Nations said that we have to help preserve the independence of every other member nation. So the Senate said, we believe we're going to be pulled into war after war after war, and that the Congress of the United States would not be deciding if we went to war, that it would be determined by the League of Nations. So because of this, they said, we refuse to sign. Y'all, they would not negotiate on this. Remember people like Henry Cabot Lodge? They were called the irreconcilables. They said, we are not negotiating on this. So as a result, we start to see that the Senate, a lot of the American people, they are changing their foreign policy. Y'all, no longer are we going to be talking about imperialism. We are going to start to practice isolationism. Hey, leave us alone. Don't pull us into your problems, into your wars going on in Europe. We want to be isolationist. Okay, let's pause here and let's do our final practice question about the League of Nations. So final things to wrap this up. On your test, you're going to have a little technology enhanced question where you're going to have to click all of the causes of World War I. And then you're also going to have to click all of the effects of World War I. So some of the effects we have these big European empires, okay, the Ottoman Empire, Austria-Hungary, those empires are going to be broken up. We see a ton of death and destruction across World War I. Y'all, they're having to rebuild everything. Germany is going to be punished for World War I. They're going to be disarmed. They cannot have a standing military. They're going to be told that they have to pay a lot of war debts. Y'all, that's important because Wilson, he wanted to end future wars, but the way that the Treaty of Versailles ended up being, it is going to punish Germany, and they're going to be so mad. They're going to be so bitter that they're going to eventually want revenge on the Allies. We are going to see the establishment of the League of Nations, but the United States did not join, and as a result of this, it is not going to be successful. The League of Nations is going to fall apart, and obviously it's not going to avoid future wars because by the 1940s, we're going to be learning about World War II. So America does really shift our foreign policy after World War I. Remember, we are now trying to be isolationist. So I hope that you remember all of that. If you have questions, need me to go over anything before your test, y'all please email me. Please come and see me during Zero Block. You know I want y'all to be successful. I want you to make a great grade on this test. Good luck.